Hello everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about Professor Layton. Man, have I been waiting for a chance to talk about Professor Layton. And with this year being the franchise's 10th anniversary, and with a brand new Layton game just released in Japan, I think I finally found my chance. While I may not be the most hardcore fan of this true gentleman, when I discovered him, I fell for this series almost instantly. Which is weird to say in hindsight because it wasn't even one of his own games that got me into it in the first place. It was a different video game character that just loves pointing at people.
Objection!
That's right! Back in the summer of 2014, I played through the first Ace Attorney game for the first time and freaking loved it. And when I was researching more about the franchise, as I do, I came across the soon-to-be-released in the US crossover game between Phoenix Wright and Professor Layton. Now, since I had just gotten into the Ace Attorney games, I wasn't really interested in tackling a whole new franchise, so I just wanted to look up a bit about the Professor to get as much info as I needed to follow his story in the crossover. But the appeal of a charismatic puzzle-solving archaeologist who also solves crimes for some reason was just too strong. And what was the thing that sold me on this franchise? Well, in case you couldn't guess from the title, it's the subject of today's video, the feature film, Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva. And yes, that means this is technically a video game movie, but just hear me out. Released in Japan in 2009 and in the States 2 years later, Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva follows the professor and his apprentice, Luke Triton, as they are asked by one of the professor's former students to investigate the mystery behind a strange young girl who claims to be gifted with eternal life. They are then thrown into a larger game that can only have one winner. That's the bare bones synopsis, because this is a pretty dense movie in terms of plot. There is a lot going on in this movie, and some of it I don't want to mention because I want to avoid major spoilers, but I think I can go more into the plot overall without talking about certain twists. First, let's talk about the prologue. It's mostly an introduction to the world of Professor Layton. Now, introductions like this are one of the tougher things to do in adaptation, since you need to get enough information across for new viewers, but not make it too derivative for longtime fans. The Spider-Man movies in particular constantly suffer from this issue. But in the Eternal Diva, the main story takes place during the events of the prequel trilogy of games, while the prologue takes place during the original trilogy, giving this prologue the exposition the movie needs, while throwing in some fun fan service cameos. It was a smart move. And yes, the Professor Layton series is laid out pretty much the same way as the Star Wars film franchise. There's even an upcoming next generation game to mirror Force Awakens, except these prequels don't suck. Anyway, once we get past the introduction, we enter the main story, and it's a damn good setup. Going a bit beyond the brief synopsis from earlier, when the Professor and Luke attend the opera to investigate, it's interrupted and revealed to be the setup for a sinister game where the winner will receive eternal life. And how do they get this prize? By solving puzzles, of course! Puzzles just solve everything in this universe. Joking aside, I really did like how they incorporated the puzzles into this movie. As a first-time viewer, it gave me an idea of what kind of challenges the Professor and Luke face in their adventures, while inviting the audience to play along. And while the puzzles may not be particularly complex, especially not to hardcore fans, it creates an excellent scenario to include the puzzle-solving aspect into the story without it seeming out of place or making it seem like the plot stops dead in its tracks just to solve them, like what happens in the games. You click on one butterfly and suddenly you're solving a puzzle instead of doing something more important. They even keep the puzzle-solving music and numbers from the games, which is a nice touch. The story is pretty much just playing this game and figuring out what's really going on with this girl claiming to be Janice's friend Melina with the gift of eternal life, and how these things are connected. There are points where it takes turns that are kind of out there, but it's definitely engaging and really captures the kind of adventures you typically find in one of the games. It just so happens that those adventures can get kind of weird sometimes. And there are times, especially in the climax, where the plot can be kind of tough to follow or difficult to put everything together. But this is easily fixed with a second or third watch through. The pieces are there, but because there's so much going on, some points get lost the first time you watch it. And because this isn't a very well-known movie that relies very much on the mystery, I'm gonna wrap up the plot summary there. So let's talk about some other aspects of the movie. Like our two heroes. There's everyone's favorite gentleman and titular character, Herschel Layton. He's very intelligent, loves a good puzzle, can put up a good fight, but prefers to find the civil solution. A self-proclaimed gentleman who is kind and courteous, he's, well, the character type often accused of being boring or too perfect. But from what I've seen, Layton is one of the most beloved video game characters out there, so why doesn't he fall into this trap? Well, I can think of two reasons. For one, he is so different from the typical mystery protagonist. The mystery and crime genre is one I absolutely adore, and with some notable exceptions, it's probably my favorite genre out there. But just like any other genre, it comes with its own set of tropes. One of the most inescapable is the outsider protagonist. You know the ones. The main characters that work for the police but have their own private practice, or someone the authorities call for help when they need it. Now, Layton fits this archetype. He's an archaeologist and professor by profession, and he doesn't even go looking for cases and mysteries. He just kind of runs into them when people ask him for help. However, where Layton differs is his demeanor. Consultants and private investigators in the mystery genre tend to be outsiders in more ways than one. They usually have a dark or mysterious past that made them very closed off from the world, or turn them into people who don't really fit into society's norms. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly become a trope in the genre. But Layton's not like that. If there's one thing that defines Layton's character more than his love for puzzles, it's his philosophy to carry out the duties of a true gentleman, to approach things with a calm optimism and offering a hand and a word of wisdom to those in need. Now, that doesn't mean Layton hasn't had obstacles to overcome, because his life has sucked. I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil these amazing stories, but unlike every other main character in his genre, Layton doesn't wear that heartbreak on his sleeve. By the time we meet him, he just tries to help others as much as he can, and always with a smile. And isn't that kind of refreshing? I love a good brooding loner as much as the next guy, but it's really nice to see a character who has had so many horrible things happen to him and still finds the good in the world and tries to help others see the same. And that carries through in this movie. He runs into a lot of scared and confused people, but through it all, he keeps a level head and focuses on figuring out what's going on while trying to comfort those around him. But it is still weird that he's an archaeology professor who somehow became a part-time detective. But that could be because of... yeah, no, that's a huge spoiler. And I really wanted to talk about that too. Just play the games, you'll hopefully know what I'm talking about. I also do have to attribute Layton's popularity among English-speaking audiences to his voice actor, Christopher Robin Miller, which is one of my favorite voiceover performances ever, and I know I am not alone on that. It's just perfect for the character. Every word just oozes Layton's delightful personality that I just spent so long explaining.
Please don't apologize. Is it not the duty of every true gentleman to help a lady in need?
It's really elegant and charming, and every time he speaks, it's the highlight of any adventure. Then there's Luke Triton, the professor's young companion and self-appointed apprentice. He's also the part-time exposition receiver and part-time kidnap fodder. Luke is... okay, I poked fun at him, but he can be very useful. Always willing to charge into danger to help the professor, and he even has a unique skill of his own with his ability to talk to animals. Somehow. Though, personally, I don't think the skill is utilized nearly as much as it should be. But as far as I can tell, a lot of fans like Luke, or at the very least tolerate him, which is pretty much unheard of for the little kid sidekick who follows the more interesting protagonist around. I don't have nearly as much to say about Luke as I did about Layton, but that's probably for the best. This movie also introduces a bunch of new characters like Janice, the professor's former student who called for his help, the composer of the opera, Oswald Whistler, and a bunch of colorful characters who had enough brains to participate in the game with the professor and Luke. There's nothing exceptional about the new characters, but the group reminds me of a classic whodunit setup. It's akin to an Agatha Christie story with a bunch of eccentric individuals from many different backgrounds put together in one environment to play off each other and solve a mystery. And as I've mentioned before, I'm kind of a sucker for that. So it's no wonder that this story is what managed to sell me on the series. There's also returning characters like the manly and spastic Inspector Grosky, the villainous scientist Jean Descalais, and that's not a spoiler, he's the villain in every story at this point in the Professor Layton series, and the professor's assistant, Emiel Tava, who is awesome. She's smart, quick on her feet, and provides some extra muscle for the group. This girl really puts up a fight. Ooh, right in the pickerats. That's enough about the characters. Let's take a closer look at the movie overall and talk about the technicals, which are very impressive. The movie was animated by the same studio that animated the cutscenes for the games, PA Works, who have done a lot of impressive work in anime before and since. But with the movie, they were also assisted by OLM Studios, who I was very surprised to learn also animate, wait for it, the Pokemon anime. And yes, that includes all the movies. which might explain why this movie seems to escape the curse of bad video game movies. Most video game movies either completely miss the spirit of the source material to the point of being unrecognizable, or are so busy recreating the video game experience or just being a spectacle, they forget to make a coherent movie. But Eternal Diva was made by people who understand the source material and how to make a good movie. Some of the most appealing things about the Professor Layton games are their charming, simplistic, almost Western-style character designs, and the engaging stories and mysteries going on between each puzzle. And this is incorporated remarkably into a cinematic adventure. It's soft and endearing, but not afraid to do something ambitious. I have heard some people complain about the use of CGI in this movie, but it's honestly not that distracting, especially compared to other films. It's mostly used for set pieces and camera angles, and a giant robot fight at the climax of the movie. Yes, that happens. That would take a lot longer to pull off in traditional animation, assuming they could at all. So yeah, it is noticeable, but let's be honest guys, CG never blends seamlessly with 2D animation. Really what matters is if it's overly distracting, and here, I'd have to say no. Most of the voice actors reprise their roles from the games, making this feel even more authentic, and they all deliver great performances. It makes it even more apparent how wonderful these actors are when the sound of the film is so much crisper than the tinny speakers of a Nintendo DS. And the music, oh my god, the music! The Professor Layton series has always had great music, but like everything else, it's enhanced so much more for the big screen. Combined with the fact that a good chunk of the story takes place during or around an opera, a lot of the plot points revolve around music. On top of improved versions of well-known tracks in the games, there are also a bunch of brand new scores and songs, probably the most memorable of which is the Song of the Sea. It's a nice melody and just one of those songs that I find myself humming a lot. And all of these elements come together for a memorable climax, but again, I'm avoiding spoilers for this video. Usually I want to dig into as much of a movie as I can, but I also want this review in particular to gauge interest, so I don't want to give anything major away, and I thought I could represent this movie as well as I wanted to without doing that. And this movie is, overall, a solid, well-made video game movie. While Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva sadly didn't break the curse of bad video game movies, it is the exception to this rule, and with new video game movies being produced, some of which are around franchises I'm very attached to, it's a beacon of hope that if one movie can overcome this well-known curse, maybe others can too. This movie is a wonderful encapsulation of what makes the game so memorable, but is also very welcoming and forgiving to newcomers. It may not be for everyone, but I think it's a great introduction to the world of Professor Layton. It was for me. The Eternal Diva is a fun adventure that's a delight to look at and beautiful to listen to, taking advantage of its bigger budget and scale to make something truly enjoyable. And as the movie goes on, it can even tug at your heartstrings. While it's probably not anything mind-blowing or deeply provocative, it's a well put together movie that's very pleasant to watch. There were even plans for a sequel film, but for reasons I've never been able to find out, it just lingered in pre-production limbo and never got made. But I think that's our loss. I'm sure Professor Layton has the ability to be successfully multimedia like many game franchises that came before it. It's obviously still going strong. They may have cracked the code on making a good video game movie, but that doesn't mean there aren't many more puzzles out there to be solved. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.